Sister Margaret had devoted 23 years of her life to the convent of St. Catherine's, finding peace in the rhythm of prayer, service, and unwavering faith. At 51, the stone walls had become her sanctuary, and the other sisters her chosen family. Each morning began with lauds at dawn, followed by meditation in the garden where roses bloomed despite the harsh winters. Her days were structured around teaching catechism to local children, tending to the elderly in their care facility, and maintaining the convent's ancient library. The other sisters respected her quiet wisdom and gentle approach to guidance. She had counseled countless troubled souls over the decades, always finding the right words to bring comfort without judgment. Mother Superior Catherine often relied on Sister Margaret's diplomatic skills when dealing with difficult situations, though their approaches to faith sometimes differed subtly. While Sister Catherine emphasized discipline and adherence to rules, Sister Margaret focused on the spirit of compassion that she believed lay at the heart of their calling. On this particular October evening, as rain pelted the stained glass windows of the chapel, Sister Margaret was completing her evening prayers when she heard urgent knocking at the main door. The sound echoed through the corridors with desperate intensity, interrupting the peaceful silence that typically enveloped the convent after dinner. Something about the frantic rhythm of those knocks made her heart race with inexplicable dread, as if she sensed that whatever waited beyond that door would change everything she thought she knew about her life's purpose. The heavy oak door creaked open to reveal Emma, a 17-year-old girl Sister Margaret knew well from the convent's adjacent boarding school for troubled youth. Emma stood shivering in the rain, clutching a small suitcase with white knuckles, her eyes red and swollen from hours of crying. Her usually neat school uniform was wrinkled and damp, and her dark hair clung to her face in wet strands. The terror in her expression was unmistakable. This was a child who had reached the absolute end of her rope. Sister Margaret had watched Emma grow from a defiant 12-year-old into a bright, articulate teenager with dreams of becoming a teacher. Emma had arrived at the school after her mother's death from addiction, with no father in the picture and distant relatives who couldn't care for a troubled adolescent. Over 5 years, Sister Margaret had witnessed Emma's transformation from an angry, lost child into a young woman with hope and ambition. She excelled in her studies, particularly in literature and history, and often spoke about wanting to help other disadvantaged children someday. But now, standing in the doorway, with rain streaming down her face, Emma looked like that frightened 12-year-old again. "Please, Sister Margaret," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the storm. "I have nowhere else to go. They're going to throw me out tomorrow morning, and I can't." Her words dissolved into sobs as she collapsed against the doorframe. Sister Margaret's maternal instincts immediately took over, pulling the trembling girl inside and wrapping her in the warmth and safety that the convent walls had always provided to those who needed shelter from life's storms. As Sister Margaret led Emma to the small sitting room adjacent to the entrance hall, the full scope of the crisis began to unfold. Through halting words interrupted by tears, Emma revealed that she was 4 months pregnant. The father was a boy from the nearby public high school who had promised her love and a future together, only to disappear completely when she told him about the pregnancy. Her foster family, already overwhelmed with financial struggles and other children, had made it clear they wouldn't take her back under these circumstances. The boarding school's strict moral code was absolute and unforgiving. Any girl who became pregnant was immediately expelled to prevent what administrators called corrupting influences on the other students. This policy had been in place since the school's founding 80 years ago and had never been challenged or modified. Sister Helen, the school's rigid administrator, had already informed Emma that she would be removed from the premises by morning, regardless of where she might go or what resources she might have. Emma's academic record was exemplary. She was set to graduate as valedictorian in just 8 months and had already received acceptance letters from 3 colleges offering full scholarships. Her teachers praised her intelligence, creativity, and leadership potential. Now all of those dreams seemed to be crumbling around her because of one mistake made in a moment of teenage vulnerability. As Sister Margaret listened to Emma's story, she felt a growing anger at the harshness of a system that seemed designed to punish rather than protect the most vulnerable members of their community. The institutional rules that had once seemed righteous now felt cruel and heartless when applied to this frightened child who needed compassion more than condemnation. That night, Sister Margaret found herself unable to rest, pacing the confines of her small monastic cell as conflicting emotions and theological questions wrestled within her mind. The room that had always been her refuge now felt like a prison as she grappled with an impossible moral dilemma. She had spent decades finding comfort in the certainty of religious law and institutional guidance, believing that following established rules was the surest path to righteousness. But tonight, those same rules felt like barriers to the compassion that she believed lay at the heart of Christ's teachings. She knelt before the wooden crucifix that had hung above her bed for 23 years, the same cross she had gazed upon during countless hours of prayer and meditation. But instead of the divine clarity she usually found in these moments of spiritual seeking, she felt only the crushing weight of an impossible choice. The sacred texts spoke eloquently of caring for the vulnerable, protecting the innocent, and showing mercy to those who had fallen. Yet the institutional policies demanded Emma's immediate removal, casting her out into a world that offered little support for pregnant teenagers with no family connections. Sister Margaret thought about the parable of the Good Samaritan, wondering if the priest and Levite who passed by the wounded man had justified their inaction through adherence to religious laws that forbade contact with the injured. She wondered if Jesus himself would have turned away a frightened pregnant teenager, or if he would have challenged the religious authorities who prioritized rules over human compassion. Outside her window, rain continued to fall against the glass, and somewhere in the dormitory, Emma was probably lying awake in terror, knowing that morning would bring expulsion into an uncertain and potentially dangerous future. The emergency meeting with Mother Superior Catherine was scheduled for immediately after morning prayers, taking place in her austere office that served as the command center for all convent operations. Sister Catherine was a formidable woman in her 70s who had led the institution with unwavering authority for 15 years, maintaining strict discipline and traditional values that she believed were essential to their religious mission. Her office reflected her personality, sparse and intimidating, decorated only with religious artifacts, a large portrait of the convent's founder, and shelves lined with theological texts and policy manuals. Sister Catherine's silver hair was pulled back severely beneath her wimple, and her pale blue eyes held no warmth as she discussed Emma's situation. She spoke of the pregnancy as a scandal that threatened their reputation in the conservative community that provided financial support for their operations. The Mother Superior emphasized that their donors and local families trusted the convent to maintain the highest moral standards, and any deviation from their established policies could result in devastating financial consequences for all their charitable works. "The girl must leave immediately," Sister Catherine declared, her voice cutting through the morning silence with absolute finality. "We cannot allow her condition to influence the other students or compromise our standing in the community. This institution has maintained its reputation for moral excellence for 8 decades, and I will not permit one girl's poor choices to destroy what generations of sisters have built." Her words were delivered with the cold efficiency of someone who had never questioned the righteousness of institutional authority, someone who saw compassion as weakness and mercy as dangerous precedent. Sister Margaret sat across from this woman she had respected for so many years, feeling her hands tremble as she realized that her next words would either save Emma or destroy her own religious career. Sister Margaret took a deep breath before speaking, knowing that she was about to venture into territory that could end everything she had worked for over the past 2 decades. Her voice was carefully measured, but her heart pounded with the intensity of someone standing at the edge of a precipice. "Mother Superior," she began, "perhaps we should consider showing mercy in this particular situation. Emma has been with us for 5 years, has demonstrated exceptional academic achievement, and has no family support system to fall back on. She's still a child herself, and casting her out seems inconsistent with our mission of providing sanctuary to those most in need." As she continued speaking, Sister Margaret's voice grew stronger despite the dangerous ground she was traversing. "I can't help but think about how Christ himself might have responded to a frightened, pregnant young woman with nowhere to turn. The Gospels consistently show Jesus extending compassion to those whom society had rejected. The woman caught in adultery, Mary Magdalene, the Samaritan woman at the well. Wouldn't he have prioritized mercy over institutional reputation? The silence that followed was suffocating, broken only by the methodical ticking of an antique clock on the wall that seemed to count down the seconds until Sister Margaret's fate would be sealed. Sister Catherine's face had flushed red beneath her wimple, her pale eyes flashing with a fury that spoke of absolute authority being challenged for the first time in years. When the Mother Superior finally spoke, her words were measured but laden with unmistakable threat, carrying the weight of institutional power and the promise of swift retribution for those who dared to question established order. "Sister Margaret," Mother Superior Catherine said slowly, each word carefully chosen for maximum impact, "I'm surprised and deeply disappointed by your willingness to question decades of established policy and moral guidance. Perhaps your judgment has become compromised, or perhaps you've forgotten the vows of obedience that bind you to this community and its leadership." The accusation hung in the air like a sword suspended over Sister Margaret's head, its implications crystal clear to both women. Sister Margaret understood perfectly what was being communicated beneath the Mother Superior's formal language. Questioning institutional authority was tantamount to rebellion, and rebellion could result in immediate defrocking and expulsion from the only home she had known for over 2 decades. At 51, she had no savings account, no family connections outside these walls, no career experience beyond religious service, and no safety net beyond the convent's protection. Everything she had built, every relationship she cherished, every prayer she had offered in this sacred space would be lost if she continued down this path. The threat was designed to be overwhelming, to force immediate capitulation and restore the absolute authority that Mother Superior Catherine had wielded without challenge for 15 years. It was a calculated display of power meant to remind Sister Margaret of her complete dependence on institutional approval for her very survival. But as Sister Margaret sat in that austere office, feeling the weight of potential destruction pressing down upon her, she found herself thinking not about her own security, but about Emma crying alone in the dormitory, facing expulsion into a world that offered little mercy to pregnant teenagers with no resources. "Mother Superior," Sister Margaret replied, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins, "with respect, I believe our highest calling is to protect those who cannot protect themselves, even when doing so challenges our comfort or convenience." The confrontation escalated rapidly after Sister Margaret's defiant response, transforming from a private disagreement into a formal disciplinary proceeding that would determine her future within the religious community. Mother Superior Catherine immediately summoned the other senior sisters, calling an emergency meeting of the convent's leadership council to address what she characterized as a serious case of insubordination and moral rebellion. Within an hour, Sister Margaret found herself standing before a panel of women she had considered friends and colleagues for over 2 decades. The charges presented against her were severe and carefully constructed to justify the harshest possible punishment. She was accused of insubordination for challenging established authority, of promoting moral relativism by questioning absolute rules, of endangering the institution's reputation through reckless advocacy, and of violating her vows of obedience by placing personal judgment above institutional wisdom. Each accusation was supported by citations from canonical law and precedent, creating an airtight case for her removal from the community. Sister Margaret stood before this tribunal feeling the weight of institutional power arrayed against her, but also experiencing an unexpected sense of clarity about her purpose and values. The faces looking back at her ranged from disappointed to openly hostile, with several sisters shaking their heads in dismay at her apparent transformation from trusted colleague to dangerous rebel. The formal nature of the proceedings made it clear that this was not a discussion or negotiation. It was a judgment that had already been rendered, requiring only her confession and repentance to avoid the ultimate penalty. As the accusations mounted and the evidence of her rebellion was presented with prosecutorial precision, Sister Margaret closed her eyes and thought about Emma, alone and frightened in the dormitory. She found strength in that image, a reminder that sometimes the most sacred act is choosing love over law, even when the personal cost is devastating. "I will not change my position," Sister Margaret declared, her voice echoing in the austere conference room with surprising strength and clarity. "That girl needs our help, not our judgment. She needs sanctuary, not condemnation. If protecting her means losing my vows, then perhaps I was never meant to serve God in this particular way. Or perhaps this institution has lost its way in pursuing reputation over righteousness." The words felt both liberating and terrifying as they left her lips, sealing her fate while affirming her deepest beliefs about compassion and moral courage. The response from Mother Superior Catherine was swift and merciless, delivered with the cold efficiency of someone accustomed to absolute authority. Within hours, Sister Margaret was formally stripped of her religious duties and ordered to pack her belongings and surrender her habit. She was given until evening to remove herself from the premises, with the understanding that her departure would be permanent and irreversible. The sisters who had sat in judgment were instructed to have no further contact with her, effectively erasing her from their community as if she had never existed. But even as her world crumbled around her, Sister Margaret felt an unexpected sense of peace settling over her spirit. She had chosen love over law, mercy over institutional preservation, and human dignity over religious reputation. The path ahead was uncertain and frightening, but it was also honest in a way that her previous life had somehow ceased to be. She had discovered that serving God didn't require institutional approval, and that sometimes the most faithful act is standing up for what you believe is right, even when it costs you everything you thought you valued. As word of her defiance spread through the convent corridors, Sister Margaret began to understand that her sacrifice might serve a purpose beyond saving Emma. It might plant seeds of conscience that would eventually grow into broader change within their rigid community. As news of Sister Margaret's defiance spread throughout the convent, an unexpected phenomenon began to occur that threatened Mother Superior Catherine's absolute authority more than any single act of rebellion could have achieved. 3 younger sisters approached Sister Margaret privately, expressing their own doubts about Emma's treatment and questioning whether their community was truly following Christ's example of compassion and mercy. These conversations took place in whispered tones in the garden, in empty corridors between prayer services, and in the kitchen during meal preparation. Sister Anne, who taught literature at the boarding school, had tears streaming down her face as she confessed her shame about the institution's harsh treatment of vulnerable students. She spoke about other girls over the years who had been expelled for various infractions, sent away without resources or support systems, many of whom had ended up in dangerous situations on the streets. Sister Mary, barely 30 and still idealistic about religious service, questioned whether their policies were creating the kind of fear-based environment that drove young people away from faith rather than toward it. Most surprising was Sister Patricia, a 40-year-old woman who had always been considered one of Mother Superior Catherine's most loyal supporters. She revealed that she had been wrestling with doubts about their approach to moral guidance for months, particularly after witnessing the emotional devastation experienced by students who were deemed failures by their rigid standards. These private conversations created fractures in the previously unified community, with sisters beginning to question policies and practices they had never challenged before. The small rebellion that Sister Margaret had unknowingly initiated began to spread like ripples in a pond, creating the first real opposition that Mother Superior Catherine had faced in her 15 years of unchallenged leadership. Whispered conversations became slightly less whispered, and several sisters began openly discussing whether their interpretation of Christian duty had become too focused on judgment and too removed from the love and acceptance that characterized Jesus' ministry. On her last evening as a nun, Sister Margaret sat with Emma in the small chapel where she had prayed thousands of times over the past 23 years. The familiar space felt different now, less like a sanctuary, and more like a memorial to a life that was ending. Emma was devastated by the news that her defender would be leaving, feeling responsible for destroying the life of the only person who had shown her unconditional kindness and support during her darkest hour. Through her tears, Emma begged Sister Margaret to reconsider, to apologize to Mother Superior Catherine, and try to salvage her religious vocation. "Don't sacrifice everything for me," she pleaded, her young voice breaking with emotion and guilt. "I'm not worth losing your calling. I'm not worth destroying your whole life. Please, there has to be another way. Maybe if I just leave quietly, they'll let you stay. Maybe if I disappear, this can all go back to normal." Sister Margaret took Emma's hands in hers, looking directly into the girl's eyes with profound tenderness and unwavering conviction. "You are worth everything, Emma," she said softly but firmly. "Every human being deserves love and protection, especially when they're most vulnerable and afraid. You are not a scandal or a problem to be solved. You're a precious child of God who deserves compassion and support. That's what I truly believe our faith demands of us, and that's worth any sacrifice." The conversation continued late into the evening, with Sister Margaret sharing stories of her own struggles with faith and doubt, helping Emma understand that questioning authority and standing up for justice were sometimes the most faithful acts a person could perform. As they sat together in that sacred space, both women found strength in their connection and hope in the possibility that love could triumph over institutional indifference. The next morning, Sister Margaret packed her few personal belongings into a single suitcase, the same size as the one Emma had carried when she arrived seeking help just days earlier. The irony wasn't lost on her. Both she and Emma were now refugees from the same institution, cast out for different reasons, but united in their experience of rejection by a system they had trusted to protect them. She removed her habit for the final time, folding the familiar garments carefully and placing them on the narrow bed where she had slept for over 2 decades. The simple civilian clothes she put on felt foreign after so many years in religious garments, but they also felt honest in a way she hadn't expected. The reflection in her small mirror showed a middle-aged woman with graying hair and worry lines, but also with eyes that held a new kind of clarity and purpose. She looked like someone who had chosen truth over comfort, principle over security, and love over institutional loyalty. As she walked through the convent corridors one final time, carrying her suitcase and a few precious books, several sisters stopped to embrace her. Many were crying openly, expressing admiration for her courage, even if they couldn't follow her example. Some who had opposed her stance during the formal proceedings now showed respect for the magnitude of her sacrifice, recognizing that she had risked everything for her beliefs. The Mother Superior was notably absent from these farewell moments, maintaining her rigid position even as her community began to fracture around her. Sister Patricia pressed a small envelope into Sister Margaret's hand as she passed, whispering that it contained contact information and a promise of support. Sister Anne kissed her cheek and promised to keep watch over Emma as much as possible. Even in her moment of defeat and exile, Sister Margaret felt surrounded by love and connection that transcended institutional boundaries. Sister Margaret's story didn't end with her departure from the convent. In many ways, it was just beginning. Within weeks, she had found work at a local community centre that served disadvantaged youth, using her education and decades of experience counselling troubled individuals to help other vulnerable young people navigate difficult circumstances. The pay was modest, but the work felt more meaningful and authentic than anything she had experienced within the rigid confines of institutional religious life. Emma, inspired by Margaret's sacrifice and unwavering support, threw herself into her studies with renewed determination. Despite her pregnancy and the emotional trauma of her expulsion, she managed to complete her high school education through correspondence courses and graduated at the top of her class. The scholarship she had earned was still available, and several colleges expressed willingness to work with her situation, offering childcare assistance and flexible scheduling for student mothers. More surprisingly, Margaret's act of conscience had created ripple effects throughout the broader religious community that extended far beyond the walls of St. Catherine's. Several younger sisters left the convent in the months following her departure, choosing to serve God through social work, community outreach, and direct service to the poor rather than through institutional religious life. They formed an informal network of former nuns dedicated to practical charity work, staying in contact with each other and with Margaret. The rigid policies that had seemed unchangeable began to face increasing scrutiny from both within and outside the religious community. Local newspapers picked up Emma's story, and community members began questioning whether institutions that claimed to serve God were actually serving the most vulnerable members of society. Donations to the convent began to decline as supporters expressed concern about the harsh treatment of students in crisis. A year later, Emma gave birth to a healthy daughter whom she named Catherine Margaret, honoring both the patron saint of the convent and the woman who had sacrificed everything to protect them both. Margaret was present for the birth, holding Emma's hand as she brought new life into the world, serving as both mentor and surrogate grandmother during the challenging early months of motherhood. The former nun had found a new kind of calling that felt more authentic and meaningful than anything she had experienced within the convent walls. Mother Superior Catherine's inflexible policies eventually led to consequences that even she couldn't ignore. Declining enrollment and donor support forced the Board of Directors to conduct a comprehensive review of the institution's practices and policies. Several board members resigned in protest over the treatment of Emma and the dismissal of Sister Margaret, and new leadership brought different perspectives on balancing moral guidance with compassion and support. The boarding school was forced to re-evaluate its approach to students in crisis, implementing new programs for counseling, family planning, education, and support for young mothers who wished to continue their education. While Sister Catherine never publicly acknowledged her mistakes or expressed regret for her actions, private changes began to occur within the institution that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. New policies emphasized rehabilitation over punishment and support over rejection. Emma thrived in her new environment, eventually earning her teaching degree while working part-time and caring for her daughter. Her academic excellence and personal resilience impressed professors and employers alike, and she quickly gained recognition as an exceptional educator with special insight into the needs of struggling students. Her experience of being rejected by one institution only strengthened her commitment to creating inclusive environments where all students could succeed. Today, 5 years after her dramatic departure from religious life, Margaret works as a counselor, specializing in helping young women navigate difficult pregnancies, family crises, and educational challenges. Her office walls are decorated with photos of the dozens of girls and women she has helped over the years, including Emma, who eventually became the teacher she had always dreamed of being. Emma's daughter is now a bright 5-year-old who calls Margaret Grandma and has no idea that the woman who loves her so deeply once wore religious habits and lived behind convent walls. Margaret never regrets her choice to leave institutional religious life, though she continues to pray daily and considers herself deeply faithful to the core principles of Christianity. She has learned that serving God doesn't require institutional approval or official sanction, and that sometimes the most sacred act is simply choosing love over law, compassion over conformity, and human dignity over organizational reputation. Her faith has become more personal and more powerful than it ever was when constrained by institutional requirements. The community center where Margaret works has become a model for other organizations serving at-risk youth, emphasizing relationship building, unconditional support, and practical assistance over moral judgment and punitive measures. Her approach of meeting people where they are, rather than where institutions think they should be, has proven remarkably effective in helping young people overcome obstacles and achieve their goals. Emma frequently brings her daughter to visit Margaret, and the 3 generations of women represent a beautiful testament to the power of unconditional love and the importance of standing up for what's right, even when the personal cost is overwhelming. Their story has inspired others to question institutional policies that prioritize reputation over human welfare and to choose courage over comfort when confronting injustice. Margaret's sacrifice reminds us that true moral courage often requires us to risk everything we think we value to protect what we know is right, and that sometimes the greatest act of faith is standing up to religious authority in defense of vulnerable people who need protection more than judgment. Thank you for listening to this powerful story of sacrifice, courage, and unconditional love. Please take a moment to write in the comments below where you're listening from around the world. We love hearing from our global community. And if this story moved you, please subscribe to our channel for more inspiring true stories that remind us of the power of human compassion. Until next time, remember that sometimes the greatest act of faith is standing up for what you believe is right, even when it costs you everything.